Well, welcome everyone. We will go ahead and get started with our next session where we will be talking about trauma-informed care because we all have a story, which we certainly do. And I'm so excited that we get to talk about this conversation. It's one that I don't know gets talked about as much as it probably deserves to in pharmacy, but in healthcare more generally as well. So we're going to be learning today from Cynthia D. Sloan, who serves as the Ohio Network Manager for the Generation RX program right here at the College of Pharmacy. And she's currently supporting the strategic prevention framework efforts and Generation RX programming across the entire state of Ohio. She has a bachelor's degree in economics, a master's degree in business administration with concentrations in finance and accounting. And she has over 20 years experience surveying the Central Ohio community through education and outreach. She has a heart for youth and desires to all individuals thrive. Something I really appreciated when I was emailing Cynthia about these formal bios that we tend to do at like academic talks in particular, was that she actually sent some like actual real information about who she is as a person in her life, not just like professional accomplishments. And that was really refreshing and I think perfect considering the topic. So I appreciated that. Cynthia is a mother of 6 and is divorced, is the 6th out of 7 kids. I am the 4th out of 6 myself, yay big families, and is a first generation college graduate, which is no easy feat in our society. Had the experience of being a teen mother, of having her first son when she was in 12th grade, is bilingual in Spanish and English, and has personally experienced homelessness and several ACEs, which we'll be talking about what ACEs stands for here as well. And I really appreciate that Cynthia says one of her biggest accomplishments is stabilizing her own family after almost a year without a home of their own, and then being awarded as a Family of the Year by Children's Services and the City of Columbus, which I'm sure was not a small feat either. So I'm going to turn it over to Cynthia, and please let's give her a warm round of applause to welcome her. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Z. Thank you all. It's an honor for me to be here today. Now, Z just shared one of my greatest accomplishments. So before we get into the content, I want you to think about one of your greatest accomplishments. I want you to think about what it was. What did you see at that moment? What did you hear? Did you smell something? Did you eat something? Who was there? Think about your biggest successful moment in your life. Let's take a moment. You can close your eyes if you need to so you can see it. Okay, I'll give you a second. All right, now, you have that moment in your mind. Did it make you smile, recalling that memory? Did it make you get a little more cheerful? Well, you have just experienced a story of your life, a good story of your life. But we all know that every story in our life isn't necessarily a good one. And I'm not going to traumatize anyone today with a bad story, but I want to get into some very important content about trauma and the importance of understanding that trauma has no boundaries. It doesn't have a particular race, ethnicity, gender, age that it attacks. Trauma is boundless. So any one of us can experience something in our lifetime that we don't have control over. And so the key with the trauma-informed care, it's addressing the trauma and the things that happened to us that we didn't have control over, and not the things that we personally did, but things that happened that we could not control, okay? All right, so first, what is trauma? So SAMHSA describes individual trauma as an event or circumstance resulting in physical harm, emotional harm, and or life-threatening harm. Now, there are about 10 different types of trauma, but for the sake of this presentation, I am presenting this particular definition of trauma. As you notice at the bottom of this definition, you can see a couple other types. Second, victim trauma and vicarious trauma. I can tell you what those mean. Vicarious trauma is the detrimental impact of being indirectly exposed to a traumatic experience or event, okay? So you could hear about something happening, and so now you're experiencing the trauma as well, okay? And then second, victim trauma, which can happen in the healthcare industry. So a healthcare provider who is involved in an unanticipated adverse patient event, medical error, or a patient-related injury. So that's something you can think about as a practitioner or as a person that becomes a victim as a result of something that was done in an error, okay? There are also 3 E's of trauma: events, experiences of events, and also the effect. Now, I want to also share at this point, you could be in a room full of people that are experiencing the same event at the same time, but the way that you experience the event can determine your outcome. So if there is, and I'll give something that's a good example. We're not going to get into the bad examples, but say someone came in and they had a machine that was throwing money everywhere, and the people closest to it obviously got their hands on some, and so the people further away are running and trying to go get it. That experience might not have been so well for those that were further away than the ones that were closer to it, right? So the way you experience those events matters, and then comes the effect. So what happens now that this has taken place? Are you jealous that the people got the money before you did? Are you mad that you didn't position yourself to be closer to the door where the money machine was coming? You know, so you start to think about what's the effect? What are the outcomes? Am I going to just go rob a bank? Well, I didn't get enough money in there anyway, so I'm going to just go and see if I can shake something out of this vending machine maybe and get a few more quarters, you know? So what is the effect after that? And I want to take this to a different level as a child. So let's pretend you guys are all in 2nd grade. And that money machine happened. How would your thought process be as a younger child compared to as an adult? As an adult, you might say, oh, wow, oh, I could give this to somebody that needs it. As a youth, you might say, oh man, I was gonna buy some candy with that. I can't get my candy after school now. You know, so the level of frustration and irritation associated with it could be totally different, right? A different experience. I mentioned childhood for a very important reason. What we're going to get into is about ACEs. ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. I have some slides pertaining to that, so let me get here. So we know that there are lasting adverse effects of trauma, especially if it happens at a younger age. Younger students are not as resilient as adults. I can take something today that I couldn't take as a kid, right? I could take someone saying, hey, I don't like her shirt. I'll go, okay, fine. But the 2nd grade me went home, was crying, you know, told my mom, tried to get confrontational. It changes as you grow and your mind develops, the way that you process things changes. But this slide here talks about the lasting adverse effects of trauma. If I was a child that never received love, I could be an adult that is, you know, I don't want anything to do with people. I could shy away from those kind of relationships. I could be isolated. It can also trigger your emotional health, where you can't regulate your emotions well because, you know, you're used to being screamed at, and with getting screamed at, your response is to always run. So in life as an adult, you're always running from responsibility. You're always looking for a way out. Even with social well-being, being really careful about who you hang out with or not hanging out with anyone at all. Spiritual well-being, maybe there was trauma that took place in a religious organization that has you at a place where you don't want anything to do with religion today. These are all real things. You could have seen something as a kid, you could have heard something as a kid that affected your mental health. But as a kid, that showed up in a way of, I'm not going to participate in class. I'm going to just sit over here. I'm going to prank the teacher today, because you want people to feel as bad as you do as a child. And some people as adults still feel that way, and they want people to feel as bad as they do. Okay. So we think about the trauma and how it physically affects the way the brain develops. So as you look at this image here, the green is the executive state. And you're in a position where you're wanting to learn from your experiences, right? The blue, you're still concerned with, am I loved? Am I loved? So you think about this all the time. And then the red for survival state, am I safe? So if you are young and you have experienced trauma, most likely you will stay in the zones between red and blue, concerned about your safety, concerned about, are you loved, are you accepted, and things of that nature. But in order to complete higher order thinking and effectively implement self-regulatory strategies, we must be able to function in the executive state. You can learn from what's happening instead of taking it personally and being on guard every time you're in a situation, okay? So we're going to get into the ACEs study, and the image shows the 10 different categories with this particular study that took place back in 1997 between the CDC and Kaiser Permanente. So adverse childhood experiences can be highly stressful experiences that can happen to any of us before we turn 18. ACEs are not our fault, and we didn't have control over when or why they happen. They can be a single event, or they can be an ongoing struggle where our safety, security, trust, or even our very sense of self is threatened or violated. And so these are the 10 original ACEs. In the 3 categories, we see abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. What Z did not mention was that I experienced 8 out of the 10 ACEs as a child. So when we look at under abuse, physical abuse, we're talking about hands-on, and then looking at emotional abuse. Maybe people were saying things that got to you all the time, or playing with your emotions, as you could say. And also sexual abuse, getting taken advantage of. It could be by someone in your home, a family friend, a relative, anyone like that. Physical abuse, physical neglect, where you're physically neglected. Maybe you don't have clean clothing. Maybe there's no food in the home. Maybe there's, very poor living conditions, right? And then emotional neglect. Maybe you grew up where people were emotionally unavailable to you. They weren't really concerned about how you felt. They weren't really concerned about your emotional well-being, okay? And then we look at household dysfunction, mental illness. Maybe a parent or a caregiver struggled with a mental illness. Maybe you had an incarcerated relative. Maybe you witnessed your mother being treated violently, or there was some substance abuse in the home, or divorce took place, right? So these are many different things that were examined during the ACEs study. It's also important to mention that the ACEs study is something that you can access today if you were curious to know what number you land on for this. And it's personal, you don't have to share it or anything like that. I'll be happy to share the link. But for each category, there are a series of questions, and you would get a point for each question. If you get a point in that category, that qualifies as an ACE that you have experienced, okay? Just to give you a little bit of background on that. 61% of adults had at least one ACE, and 16% had 4 or more types of ACEs. Females and several racial and ethnic minority groups were at greater risk for experiencing 4 or more ACEs. Here are some other common adversities beyond the ACEs: discrimination, poverty, racism, other violence, intergeneration and cultural trauma, separation, other big changes in life, bereavement and survivorship, adult responsibilities as a child. So why address trauma? Because the effects of trauma show up in various ways. It could be in poor physical and mental health, low academic achievement, limited workforce development, risky health behaviors, difficulty with relationships, negative self-perception, and other ways as well. Many people do not realize that exposure to ACEs is associated with increased risk for health problems across the lifespan. Can you heal from trauma? Healing doesn't mean the damage never existed. It means the damage no longer controls our lives. And this is very relevant because there's something called resilience. Resilience is your ability to bounce back when bad things do take place in your life. So just like if you had a cut on your arm, an open wound that heals over, it doesn't mean it never happened, but it's not controlling you. You may not feel the pain anymore. And our scars are just reminders that we made it. Any scars of any kind, those emotional scars, the physical scars, painful memories, they're just reminders that we made it through. One in 6 adults experience 4 or more ACEs. At least 5 of the top 10 leading causes of death are associated with ACEs. Preventing ACEs could reduce the number of adults with depression by as much as 44%. So what is trauma-informed care? Trauma-informed care shifts the focus from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. It is a strengths-based approach which seeks to understand and respond to the impact of trauma on people's lives. The approach emphasizes physical, psychological, and emotional safety for everyone and aims to empower individuals to reestablish control of their lives. As Dr. Barnett spoke earlier, I noticed that she mentioned a system that they have that touches on the social determinants of health at Nationwide Children's Hospital. And I realized that the ability to ask those questions is also a form of creating a trauma-informed care system. By getting questions answered that might not be the most comfortable questions to answer, but allowing individuals the opportunity to get the help that they need. There are 6 core principles of trauma-informed care: safety, trustworthiness and transparency, peer support, collaboration, empowerment, humility, and responsiveness. We all have a story. I have a quote here from Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. She's the author of The Deepest Well, which talks about healing trauma as an adult. So 20 years of medical research has shown that childhood adversity literally gets under our skin, changing people in ways that can endure in their bodies for decades. It can tip a child's developmental trajectory and affect physiology. It can trigger chronic inflammation and hormonal changes that can last a lifetime. It can alter the way DNA is read and how cells replicate, and it can dramatically increase the risk for heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, even Alzheimer's. As I mentioned before, trauma has no boundaries. So how can we move forward? There isn't a one size fits all answer, but we can anticipate and recognize current risks for ACEs in children and history of ACEs in adults. We can refer patients to effective services and support. We can link adults to family-centered treatment approaches that include substance abuse treatment and parenting interventions. We can improve access to high-quality childcare by expanding eligibility activities offered and family involvement. We can use effective social and economic supports that address financial hardship and other conditions that put families at risk for ACEs. We can also enhance connections to caring adults and increase parents and youth skills to manage emotions and conflicts using approaches in schools and other settings. We can also adopt and support family-friendly policies such as paid family leave and flexible work schedules. We can recognize challenges that families and individuals face and offer support and encouragement to reduce stress. We can support community programs and policies that provide safe and healthy conditions for all children and families. We do have some university resources available to everyone. So if you're staff or faculty, if you are a student, and one of the resources I really want to point out is through the Student Wellness Center. They have a health and wellness resource guide, which is for all. So you can put in if you're a student or if you are a parent or if you are staff or faculty, and it will give you some resources available to you. These are all of the different things I consulted. And this is my information. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to ask. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I have two things. One, I think another thing that we can do is destigmatize resources and the usage of resources, especially parents who, for whatever reason, are on the list of knowing that they are causing ACEs. I think that's something that's just, and two, kind of along those lines, is there any data that you're aware of about the speed to which adults who may have experienced ACEs access resources and how that affects long-term outcomes? Like, are they more likely, the faster you do it, are you more likely to kind of be a better adult or, less trauma?
So that's a really good question that you asked. So there's research now that speaks about how it's never too late to create a positive childhood experience. So you can be 50 and finally go to the theme park or finally do that activity that you wanted to do as a child. And that will ultimately affect your outcome as a person today. With any kind of trauma, the faster you address it, the better your outcome will be. Just like if someone had a broken leg and they waited 2 months to go get you get what I'm saying? It's the same kind of thing. So it's important to address our mental health as well as our physical health as we move forward in life. And it's really never too late until it's too late, when you no longer can go and do it and go and get the help that you need. That's when it's too late. As long as you're breathing, it's never too late to get the help that you need. Any other questions? And that's my son. Yes.
That's someone's experience, 8 out of the 10 days.
What I would say is, if you ever get to the point that you feel like you need help, you need help. And don't have shame in receiving the help that you need. That's why the resources are available. There are counselors that have the expertise to guide you appropriately. There are just people that care and that are ready to receive you if you are wanting to get some help to cope through different situations. I say, just go do it. Just go ahead. Make a phone call, send a text. There are a lot of resources available. Are you all familiar with 988 now instead of the long suicide prevention hotline number that it used to be? So there are resources available. Mm-hmm.
So ACEs is something I just actually recently heard about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, past couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
How do we make this specific topic more accessible? Or how do you get people talking about it more?
I'm glad you asked, because so just to give a little bit of background, when I began at the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences as a prevention coordinator, one of the programs that is taught frequently is trauma-informed care. After taking one of the classes, and it didn't cost anything, it piqued my interest to want to learn more. There are free programs available online. I'd be happy to share all of those resources. To keep the conversation going, more presentations like this, even in a small staff setting. Take what you learned today and share it. Gather your resources specific to your team and share those things. The beautiful thing about OSU resources is that if you make a call, it's confidential. They're not going to say, hey, oh, you know, your student called, and you know your staff member called me, right? They're not going to do that to you. So knowing that, like the employee assistance program, these are things built in so that we can be okay. OSU cares about us. So continuing to share those resources, and then being able to recognize how people are showing up. You know, if they show up and they're not, and you know that they haven't been bathing, or they show up and they're late all the time, or they are not coming, or you know, maybe they were crying at their desk. There are different ways to know when someone isn't okay. We have to build a community where it's okay to not be okay, and give them the resources that they need in order to thrive. Yep. Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Thank you for this presentation. I lead college workshops with female veterans, and this background helps me feel more prepared for things that may.
Oh, okay. Oh, wonderful. Oh, you're welcome. And I would be happy to share all the resources from this presentation, every source I got the information from, including some different trainings you can access for free that you can work through on your own time. There's a lot available regarding trauma-informed care. Yes. Okay, thank you so much. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing all of that with us.
Yep, no problem.
Mhm.